Today, we are going to debate if you should make the great gamble on these 8 players in fantasy football drafts this year. Is the risk worth the reward? Welcome, man, Lucas Wenzel and Cameron Lawrence. Yes, you heard that correctly. Not Tyler Plath. Cameron Lawrence is hanging out with us today. Cam, it's good to have you back, buddy. Despite all the shots that I took at you,
yeah, I know.
I'm honestly happy to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Got a little break for once. I finally got a video out on Monday, so I mean, we're coming back slowly but surely. Slowly but surely.
Slowly but surely has been the theme of your life for the last 6 weeks, it sounds like.
Yes.
Between working on a house, being displaced, waiting for that to get all finished. Look, anything that you can contribute here, we're obviously thrilled to have you on. Ty's excuse, though, so now I got to throw some shade, though, on Ty, because, I can't go an episode without one of you being gone throwing some shade. Ty's got a doctor's appointment. Your Wi-Fi was out. Ty's got a doctor's appointment. Yeah. All the air quotes I'm throwing out here, if you're listening to the audio version, lame little excuse. I'm not gonna lie. It is what it is, though.
It's ridiculous. He said he had a tummy ache. I mean, come on. I'm just kidding.
You don't even go to the nurse's office for that guy. No, we'll quit throwing shade. We got 8 players we're going to debate here today that carry a decent amount of risk, some high risk, but the reward on these players could be absolutely incredible. We're going to debate if taking that risk is worth it, starting right now. So as I said, we got 8 players we're going to dive through here, mostly pretty much all running backs and wide receivers. And it's a lot of guys who are going to be going in the middle to late rounds of your drafts. We're not going to be looking at, the Tyreek Hills, the Jalen Waddles, the Devon Achans, right? Like, they're going early in your drafts for a reason. It's probably worth taking the risk there. But on some of these later round guys, you might be thinking, do I go safety here? Do I take someone a little bit safer? Or do I take this guy who actually might carry an immense amount of risk in order to see if he could turn into, a top 30, a B, A tier kind of guy in my fantasy lineup. So let's start with one that I'm fascinated to talk about, Cameron. And you actually brought it to my attention earlier today, how low we are on this player. It's Jameson Williams, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. Currently goes off the board on Underdog right now. In the 10th round is the wide receiver 48. And just so you all know where we have Jameson Williams right now, Cam, you have him as a wide receiver 69. He's our consensus wide receiver 64. And I've got him at the wide receiver 73. And that honestly shocked me. Jameson Williams was not a guy where I went into my rankings and I specifically looked, all right, where do I have Jameson Williams ranked? So when you pointed out I have him at 73, I felt pretty low on him. But the more I sit here and think about it, the more I don't blame myself for having him that low, because, this guy has only had 51 targets, 395 yards, and only 3 touchdowns in 18 career games. Now, I get it. He was coming off his ACL in 2022. He faced a suspension in 2023. But this has been deemed the Jameson Williams breakout year by a lot of people in the space. And what are your thoughts on that? Is the risk worth the potential reward here for Jameson Williams?
I just don't feel like it is. My issue with JMO is he feels like a fancy Rashid Shaheed. That's kind of the way I look at him. And the reason is, and I looked at all of our stats. I have the highest amount of targets for JMO this year at 83. None of us feel like he's going to reach 100 targets.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, I could see Gibbs getting 250 total touches. I could see Monty getting 250 total touches. I could see Amon-Ra seeing 160 targets. I can see Sam Laporta seeing 130 plus targets, right? There's just not that much left to go around at the end of the day for Jameson Williams. And especially when he's a guy that all we've seen from him is he's got blazing speed and he runs one route. Right? It's not like he's got this crazy route tree that he's going back and forth. They're trying to use him on reverses and stuff, but he's the speed guy. He is. And when you have an offense that's got a ton of volume going other places, yeah, he'll have some great weeks, maybe in like a best ball. But even at, wide receiver 48, he's 48 on underdog and a sleeper. So redraft and best ball right now. I don't want him either, because it just feels too rich for a guy who I'm hoping to maybe get 2 or 3 good games out of the entire season.
Yeah, and I'll correct myself. This ADP is sleeper. I brought it up that it was underdog. It is on sleeper. And you brought up the point that I was going to bring up. The thing that needs to happen for JMO is he needs to start seeing more volume in the passing game. If Amon-Ra saw 164 targets, I believe it was, in 16 games last year. So he was going to see 170 targets last year. Excuse me. You had Sam Laporta, who I have statted out for 127 targets this year. I think he'll continue to see a heavy target load as the second best weapon in this offense. You're right. You have Jahmyr Gibbs. I have him statted out for 85 targets, right? Now, you might say, oh, some of those are going to filter to JMO. He wasn't around the whole time. They were force-fed the ball. Why wouldn't they? They made it to the NFC, championship with only having him for 9 games last year by only giving him 51 targets last year, or 42 targets, last year. So I personally don't see the route. I loved the talent coming out of college. I initially loved the situation. If Sam Laporta wasn't there and didn't, break out as the number 1 overall tight end last year, maybe we're having a little bit of a different conversation with JMO this offseason. But, for me, JMO just seems like the complementary piece that this team needs as the downfield stretcher. And when I'm looking at him inside of the top 50, for a guy who's not, I don't think is going to hit 80, 90 targets this year, that's just not a smart investment for me, despite what I think the reward could potentially be. I just think the Lions have found success without him. So why are we going to fix something that ain't entirely broke?
Yeah, no, 100%. And like you clarified it a little bit in the beginning, and I just want to reiterate it. Obviously, he's pick 109 in sleeper right now, right? So he is the 10th round. So if you take JMO and he's a bust, is it going to kill you? No. But what we're saying is, in those rounds, there are consistent players that you'll be able to plug into your lineup that you can still take there. Whereas JMO, more likely than not, is going to be a guy who sits on your bench and is probably dropped throughout the season. That's kind of where we're going at it. Like, oh, you take him, he's a bust, he kills your lineup. No, we're not saying that. That is not the argument. I just want to reiterate that.
Yeah, we are not sitting here and telling you that these guys are going to be week 1 starters and they're going to be busts this year. I mean, if we were going to call these guys busts, we would be talking about the earlier guys in your drafts. We're going to have a whole episode on ADP values and busts later this offseason. That's not this episode, but we're looking at guys who, when you're looking at them on the draft board, you're thinking, I see the path to an immense breakout season, but you know what? The floor is quite literally 6 feet underground, right? Like that is the floor for some of these guys. And I don't think we want to admit it, but for this next guy who's also a field stretcher, I'm really scared the floor is 6 feet under, and it is Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, people are going to kill me for this one because everybody loves Xavier Worthy. All the best ball bros out there, they hate me right now because the skeleton key this offseason is figuring out which one of these Kansas City wide receivers is going to have a phenomenal year. Will it be Rashee Rice if he actually gets on the field this year, if he survives a year without suspension similar to Alvin Kamara? Will it be Hollywood Brown, the free agent signing for the Kansas City Chiefs? Or will it be Xavier Worthy, drafted pick 21 overall this year? And I think that is important to point out because he is the highest drafted wide receiver the Chiefs have taken in the last 3 years, right? Sky Moore, he was second round pick 54. Rashee Rice was pick 55. And where we have Xavier Worthy in our rankings, well, let me say this first. He's currently going as the wide receiver 37 right now. And Cameron, you and I both have him back-to-back in our rankings. I have him at wide receiver 46. You have him at wide receiver 45. I think Ty would even say the floor is lower than 6 feet under.
Yeah.
I wish Ty was here to explain himself on this one. He has him at the wide receiver 62, but he's consensus wide receiver 49 for us here at the Fellas. How do I want to even start discussing Xavier Worthy? Let me say this, and I'll let you chime in. I feel like this is a game we played before, and we don't have to lose again. we can make the choice to not lose again like we did with Sky Moore. And I think I'm leaning that way with Xavier Worthy.
I struggle with Worthy because, like you said, I mean, the upside is so apparent with Worthy. Like the offense you're in, what we've seen from Tyreek Hill. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is very different, but that's the comparison he's going to draw because of the speed. My issue for this season is Hollywood being there. I think Hollywood is taking over that role. I'm still high on Worthy, actually. Not high. I'm like in on Worthy a little bit. From a dynasty perspective, I think he can be a decent wide receiver in the NFL, especially attached to Mahomes with the speed he's got. I just think for this season, for an undersized guy to, like obviously Tank Dell just did it last season, but like Puka, Tank Dell's the exception, right? We're not expecting most of these guys take a little bit longer, especially in an offense like the Chiefs where they got Travis Kelce, you got Hollywood, Rashee Rice coming back, right? I mean, you got a lot of options. So I think that's why I'm kind of pumping the brakes a little bit on Worthy, but I do understand that if he hits, it's ridiculous. I mean, it is, but more likely than not, I mean, I want to say 85% of the time in my best ball drafts, I'm taking Hollywood compared to taking Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, and really that's what it comes down to in this risk versus reward debate is it kind of is a plant your flag on which Kansas City wide receiver do you want? Is it Xavier Worthy or is it Hollywood Brown? For me, it's Hollywood Brown. Absolutely, I agree. I think these dudes, like Hollywood Brown isn't quite the burner that Xavier Worthy is, but they're going to play similar roles.
Yes.
They're going to be on the perimeter. And this is the thing I brought. Teams are already playing too high safety against the Chiefs at one of the highest rates in the league. Mm-hmm. So when you add Xavier Worthy, our team's going to look at that and say, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we should blanket Travis Kelce more underneath." No, they're going to keep playing too high safety at an incredible rate, especially now that you added Xavier Worthy. So, all of that to say is you're right. If Xavier Worthy hits, and he is indeed the best wide receiver on the Kansas City Chiefs, I mean, we are talking about a guy, who could be looking at a top 20. How high would you go? Top 15?
I mean, if he hits, it's gonna be, we're gonna be talking about him in the Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors realm, right? But that's if everything goes right. If he hits, it's just I think down the road, could he hit 100%? I just don't think it's this season with the current cast they have.
Even if Xavier Worthy was bumped down to like the wide receiver 40, 42, I'd be much more interested there. I would be swinging all day at that price. But 37, when there's just other guys in that range in terms of other positional needs that I'll be targeting, running backs in that range. I typically am drafting running backs later this year compared to earlier. The 7th round, you're still looking at like quarterbacks in that range too. Like there are just more surefire guys in that range, I feel like, than taking a risk on Xavier Worthy.
Yeah.
If you were going to be my wide receiver 4, I'm much more willing to take that shot if I don't need to think about him as my first line or first backup in line to fill in for a roster spot. But man, it's so tough. I don't blame people for wanting to take the shot on him this year. I really don't. Like, this is not me like saying you should not be drafting Xavier Worthy. I am just telling you, I'm going to have significantly less shares of him than the public will, and significantly less than the Xavier Worthy truth as well.
Yeah, I think he's ties Patton and saying better in best ball. I think that's for sure him. The issue is these are the guys on sleeper, so your redraft who are going around him right now. You got Terry McLaurin, DeAndre Swift, Jordan Addison, Ramondre Stevenson, Jaden Reed are all going just before him. Then you got Godwin, Dak Prescott, Hollywood, Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, Najee Harris, Kyler Murray, Raheem Mostert, Zamir White, DeAndre Hopkins, all going behind him. So, like, I know those aren't exactly sexy names, but if we're talking about guys that you're going to be able to plug into your lineup every single week who are going to for sure be contributors, Xavier Worthy is probably at the bottom of that list.
Right. And I think I heard about at least 5 names on that list that I would say, you know what, given my needs probably in a specific draft, I would probably take them ahead of Xavier Worthy. So,
yes,
I don't blame people for wanting to take him at the wide receiver 37 cost because those people are right. The ceiling for him this year could easily be top 15. But what the floor I'm concerned about is that he ends up being the wide receiver 62, right? Where Ty has him ranked. That's where I'm concerned the floor is as well.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one more wide receiver here before we go to break, Cameron. Christian Watson was not a favorite of yours last season.
No.
Ty and I were kind of playing like, at ADP, I'm good with him. Going as a wide receiver 26 last year, now going off the board as the wide receiver 46.
Yeah.
He's my wide receiver 42, your wide receiver 33. He's our consensus wide receiver 39. And just for comparison as well, it's not like we're super, super, super in on Christian Watson. Jaden Reed is our wide receiver 30, which is right around ADP. I believe he's going off the board as a wide receiver 29 right now, 29-30, right in that range. The big thing with Christian Watson, everybody knows, right? The dude has rubber band hamstrings, right? They're old, they snap, they ain't good no more. Missed 11 games over the first 2 years of his career. That being said, though, he's gone in to see a specialist this offseason. They figured out, is he distributing his weight differently? Why are we having so many hamstring problems here? I don't know how much stock people want to put into that. I'm at least going to say, hey, you know what? He's taking the time to actually figure it out, and he's not just resorting to, maybe I'll stay healthy this year. I'll hit the weight room a bit more. Like, he's actually putting concentrated time and effort into this, which I think, in my mind, I'll put a little bit of weight into that. But really, when Christian Watson was on the field last year, he led Green Bay in target share, air yard share, yards per route run, and red zone targets. Christian Watson is 1,000% worth the risk to me this year. I already talked about him as the best kept secret in fantasy football this year because people will say, well, everybody's talked about him as a stud already. Yeah, but the best kept secret that you don't realize is precisely that when Christian Watson was on the field last year, he was preferred target to Jaden Reed. He was the more efficient route runner than Jaden Reed. He was getting targeted in the red zone more than Jaden Reed. Everybody's just going to say, well, Jaden Reed had the better year down the stretch. He was Jordan Love's safety blanket. Do I dare mention he disappeared in the playoffs, though?
Yeah.
Do I dare mention that? So I'm 1,000% in on Christian Watson this year. At wide receiver 46 price tag, that's like the smash pick of all smash picks for me this year.
Yeah, it's the issue with Green Bay. Dave Kluge just put out a tweet today on. I don't know if you saw it. He said
I did. It was a great tweet.
All the optimists think that all four of the Packers' top wide receivers could be their number one. But me, I think that all this is him saying, and not me. But me, I think that all four of the top 7 Packers wide receivers could be the 7th option on this team. It's because it's kind of a jumbled mess right now. The reason I'm with you, I like Christian Watson is I think he's looked the best when they're all on the field at the same time. Obviously, last year Jaden Reed was a rookie. He had a year on him, so that does make a difference. I'll give you that. But I think currently at ADP, unless he's not healthy, I feel like there's just no way he doesn't outperform it. Right? Whereas we talked about Xavier Worthy, we talked about JMO. It does feel like they're either going to way outperform it or they're not going to be close to it. With Christian Watson, it feels like if this dude's healthy, he's at least a top 30 option. He is. And even if Jaden Reed ends up being the wide receiver 1 in this offense, we've seen enough with Christian Watson with both Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love to go, okay, but Christian Watson's still going to be a pretty good wide receiver. Jordan Love just threw for 4,200 yards and 30 touchdowns last year too. So it's not like this offense can't support multiple good wide receivers. So I just think at the ADP he's at, that's got to be his floor right now.
I mean, this Green Bay offense was top 5 in pass attempts and red zone pass attempts last year. And again, if you're going to look for Christian Watson around the end zone, he's going to be the preferred guy in that area. And it's not like we haven't seen this dude be explosive before. I mean, we're looking at a guy who's had 8 top 24 finishes already in his career. Now, they could say, well, that's not a great ratio considering how many games he hasn't been a top 24 wide receiver then. To which I kind of say, like, yeah, but you're getting him at the wide receiver 45. Like, I am not sitting here and telling you that Christian Watson is going to be a top 15 option this year. What I am telling you is that Christian Watson is too good of a football player, is playing too big of a role when he's on the field in this Green Bay Packers offense for him to not outperform this wide receiver 45. So you boil in the risk of, well, he might miss 8 games this year. He might. That's how many he missed last year. But the reward you get out of that, it's a classic. All these guys are labeled injury prone until they're not. It's the Keenan Allen case all over again. Keenan Allen, injury prone, injury prone, injury prone, injury prone. That's all we kept hearing last year. But then you actually sit down and look at the guy and you say, wait, he hasn't been injured since 2017. He's only missed 3 games in the last 6 seasons. Right? Like, let's slow down and recognize, like, things can change for these guys. And all it takes is for Christian Watson to not be labeled injury prone anymore. And he pays this off by a country mile. Yeah. And that's the reward you get. And I think it's 100% worth it at wide receiver 46 and for the offense he's in. You draft good players in good offenses.
And my favorite thing about Christian Watson right now is if he's the wide receiver 20 this year, he's going to be discounted again next year because people are still going to call him injury prone, even if he plays all 17 games. I mean, we saw it with Keenan Allen his whole career. Like you said, he went from 2017 not getting injured, and for 6 years until he finally got hurt again, everyone was like, he's injury prone. It's like, no, he's not. And we're going to label Christian Watson injury prone for the rest of his career. Even if he plays 17 games for 7 seasons in a row, he will always be injury prone.
Let's take a quick break, Cameron. We'll be back with 5 other players where we'll debate if the risk is worth the reward. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back. Instead of talking about all wide receivers on this episode, we are going to talk about a few running backs coming up here. We've already talked about Jameson Williams, Xavier Worthy, and Christian Watson. Is the risk worth the reward? Worth the risk? However you want to say it. We're going to debate that here now with Cincinnati Bengals running back Zack Moss. I personally love Zack Moss. I have been the Zack Moss truther around these parts.
You have.
Zack Moss currently goes out the board as the running back 32. He is my running back 21. I've got him insanely high in my rankings. Cam, you have him at 28. Our consensus running back 23 overall. Look, we saw last year that Zack Moss, I don't want to say could handle lead responsibilities, but when given the opportunity to last year when filling in for Jonathan Taylor,
he handled them.
I'll say last year he handled it.
Yeah,
I mean, we hadn't seen it prior in his career, but last year he handled it because he averaged 17.8 fantasy points per game in Jonathan Taylor's absence. He was a top 10 running back in 4 out of 5 of those games. You look at the role he's stepping into in Cincinnati, your boy Joe Mixon, Cameron. He was a top 10 running back in each of the last 3 years in PPR formats. Now, I understand this loud and clear. Chase Brown is still on this team. You know what? Chase Brown, he is a nice little player. He has an explosive profile. He's got some nice burst, some nice acceleration. He's got some juice. But the running back 32, excuse me. To me, this screams the reward that you could potentially get with Zack Moss. The risk doesn't actually feel that low because you're drafting him as a running back, a low-end running back 3 on your team. So in my mind, I'm not risking much. The risk is worth the reward is worth whatever the risk is here.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking.
He's going to
just
keep
off
going.
in space.
Yeah. I got to go to my house and sand my railings later.
No, I was just off in space there. I was listening to you. Just wasn't thinking that I had to talk anytime soon. I will be honest. I'm coming up more on Zack Moss, and a lot of it just has to do with situation. It has to do with, what he's stepping into, what the roles look like. As big of a Joe Mixon guy as I've been, let's not act like Joe Mixon's been this crazy efficient, unbelievable player, right? I mean, he's been good, and then fantasy wise, it just it's been a great role. On top of that, you look at Jamar Chase should be healthy, T Higgins is going to be there, right? Joe Burrow should be healthy, so this is an offense that's going to be in the red zone a lot. I think, for Zack Moss, I have him at 28. I've got a feeling he's probably going to creep up a couple spots in my rankings as this, this offseason goes on, as we tweak it a little bit. But obviously the downside's there because we've seen it in Buffalo. We've seen him have chances in Buffalo and literally fumble them away, multiple times. And so that is the risk, is that Chase Brown completely takes over the backfield with Zack Moss. That's why he is the running back 32 right now. That's why, people are lower on him. And I know Ty's definitely lower on him because Ty's like, but they don't have anything invested in this backfield right now. They could just go, all right, Zack Moss, you're not the guy, move on, next. It's just, for me, I think he showed enough last season that as long as he's given an opportunity in a good role, I think he'll continue to perform well enough to stay on the field.
The Bengals also wasted no time bringing him in once they cut ties with Joe Mixon. I think that's the other thing. Like, it's like, I'm going to follow the money, except I'm not going to follow the contract, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to follow the fact that they went out and invested resources into him very quickly after parting ways with Joe Mixon. Again, it wasn't much money. Here's the other thing that I've heard Hayden Winks over at Underdog Fantasy. I've heard him kind of be like the lead voice of the anti-Chase Brown fan club this offseason. He put out a tweet earlier today. He asked a very simple question. And here's what it is. And you can answer this, Cameron. I'll ask this to you and I'll let you answer it.
All right.
You tell me. Is it good that the running back 37 on Underdog, Chase Brown, played 67 more snaps on special teams than on offense last year? He played 160 special team snaps to 93 offensive snaps.
Oh,
like, is that a good thing?
Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't realize it was 93 snaps. That's crazy low. That should be a wake up call if we're going, oh, I think Chase Brown's going to overtake Zack Moss here. Chase Brown's got some hurdles of his own to even be, the solid number 2 back, right? I mean, as the offseason goes on, they're probably, teams continue to bring people in. And if you're playing special teams so much last season, that doesn't mean you're guaranteed to even be, the running back 2. Obviously, he's the front runner to be, but yeah, man, that's a crazy stat.
I feel like the risk I'm running with Zack Moss at running back 32 for what I see his upside potentially being, in my mind, knocking on the door of a top 20 running back, it's a no-brainer to me. And I get, I'm all for it. In best ball drafts, if you want to slap a little Chase Brown, be my guest. I've slapped a little Chase Brown as well, but I'm all over Zack Moss at the current ADP, man. I find it hard to believe he doesn't outperform running back 32 in redraft formats this year based on what he showed last year in an Indianapolis Colts offense that also had Anthony Richardson at the helm for a handful of those games as well, who is a rushing threat of his own. But now as he especially steps into an explosive Cincinnati Bengals offense in which, as you said, they'll be in scoring position plenty this season. Let's talk about another running back since we talked about a lot of wide receivers on the front end. And I think this is a player where I think the conversation is becoming really, really, really murky. I think his value is dipping pretty quick, actually. It is Gus. Oh my goodness, Gus Edwards. I almost said Gus Moss. I started to say Zack Moss, and then I said Gus Moss. Gus Edwards of the Los Angeles Chargers. I think his value is starting to take a dip. He's currently going off the board. The running back 37 on Sleeper. He's currently my running back 35, your running back 37, Cameron. He's our consensus running back 36 here at the fellas. And I think what we're coming to the realization to is that we're finally remembering who Gus Edwards is. He is a perfectly fine NFL running back that happened to score 13 touchdowns last year. No disrespect to Gus Edwards. He's a perfectly fine back. He just scored 13 times last year compared to his career high, which was 6. And he, handled most of the lead back duties last year. And like, this isn't like the volume he got isn't super outlier-ish, I'll say, because the first 3 years of his career, he saw 133, 137, and 144 rush attempts. So it's not like 198 attempts is like, whoa, where did that come from? I mean, the guy has handled, 140 plus attempts, almost, 2 times in his career already. And I think what's making this conversation so murky now is that not only are we bringing Gus Edwards down to where he actually is as an NFL talent, as an NFL running back, but we're now remembering, oh yeah, J.K. Dobbins, like, yeah, the Achilles, it's one of the most, it's basically the Grim Reaper of all running back injuries in the NFL. You don't bounce back from that extremely well, but Gus Edwards was second fiddle to J.K. Dobbins while J.K. Dobbins was available to the Baltimore Ravens. And then the Kamani Vidal hype train is basically going off the rails at this point.
It's getting nuts.
It's getting really nuts. And I'm like, to me, that's where I start to say, yeah, the risk, this is very similar to Zack Moss. The risk at running back 37 is absolutely worth it. Because I think Gus Edwards could easily outperform that with J.K. Dobbins coming off an Achilles, with Kamani Vidal, a 6th round pick that people are screaming will say, yeah, he could be the guy for Jim Harbaugh this year. I just don't buy that. I just don't as a 6th round pick. I think to me, this feels more like if we're going to hope for anything for Kamani Vidal, let's hope that he gets the Kyron Williams treatment. If he sits behind 2 vets in his rookie season, and when he earns the trust of the coaching staff next offseason, when he's called upon at the start of next year, then we could see Kamani Vidal break out. But I don't think that's going to be this year. But what about you? How do you view this backfield? Is the risk worth the potential reward here?
I mean, we're talking guys, running backs in the 30s who could hit 200 carries. That list is very low, right? It's Gus Edwards and I mean maybe Zeke, right? I mean it's like
maybe Zeke, that's a good one.
Who aren't going to be reliant on an injury, I should say. Obviously, some of these other guys going there, like Jerome Ford, who's going around there. If Nick Chubb gets hurt right away, yes, he could see it, but he needs an injury to get there. I'm talking guys who don't need injuries. Gus Edwards could easily hit 200 rush attempts, especially in this offense, even if he is splitting time. We know what Jim Harbaugh wants to do. He wants to run the stinking ball, even if he's got Justin Herbert, right? It's not like they're going to surprise us. And it's not like Kamani Vidal is this high draft pick, right? He was a 6th round pick. It's
not even a Dameon Pierce 4th round pick.
Exactly. So it's the upside's so apparent. And I just don't see a way that he doesn't hit 150 plus carries, which at the running back 37, you're kind of like, okay, if he hits 130, 150 carries, it's like, okay, he's at ADP. It's gross. Maybe I can throw him in a couple games. But if he's 200 plus carries, there's no way he doesn't outperform it. There's no way he's not borderline a top 25 running back on the season. He's not going to hit 13 rushing touchdowns. He's on the team that probably will try to run the ball every time they're in the 5-yard line. But they're not going to be inside the 5-yard line nearly as much as the Ravens were last season. And so it's kind of like, who Gus Edwards is. Don't get it twisted. Don't think he's a Charger. He's the starter. He's going to be a top 20 guy. But at the same time, he's not going to be a bust, right? He's not going to finish as the running back 60 because of the role he's going to be in outside of injury, because he is 29. So that is a risk if you're taking him. But outside of injury, he's not going to be a bust.
Yeah, and I think that's the other risk we talk about is, he's an aging running back. The risk is he could potentially not be the lead running back in this offense. But I think we're going to dispel both of those by saying, the Achilles tear for a running back is, again, the Grim Reaper, as I mentioned. I mean, Deontay Foreman was not the same for what? 2.5, almost 3
Yeah.
years after that injury. He didn't even come close to returning to form until then. Who's the other running back that I'm
Cam
thinking of?
Akers,
Cam Akers. I mean, he had his last year and
then tore it again.
tore it
That poor
again.
guy.
Yeah.
But JK, I mean, he right off the ACL right into an Achilles tear. So it's just like, man, that's you're adding stuff on top of it too, which is just
Right. Because he already wasn't going to be 100%
yeah.
healthy with,
Yeah.
the ACL, the ACL recovery cost, I'll call it,
Yes.
where, he was already going to be, 20% less of full production last year. This would be the year where he's back to 100%, but now you're throwing the Achilles and now you're basically down to like 60, 70% here for the next 2 years.
Which sucks. I love JK.
Oh,
I
yeah.
wanted JK to be the guy so badly, and it just never. I mean, you want to talk about one of the what ifs that I wish we could have back.
Yeah.
JK Dobbins is up there.
Yeah, 100%. So I agree. I think when we look at the running backs in here, I think the risk there is actually lower than we're probably making it out to be. And the reward of Gus Edwards returning on a running back 37 ADP is quite literally he has to finish top 30. And you're like, yeah, you know what? I got him at a pretty good value this year. So I am with you. I would definitely take the plunge on Gus Edwards. Let's flip positions, Cameron. We got 3 more players to talk about here. We'll flip the position to wide receiver now. And a guy who I'm really fascinated to hear your take on, because I think this guy, like the hype train is just starting to get rolling, right? Like it is like just starting to pull out of the station. You haven't lost hope to chase down the train yet. There's still time for you to get on. And it's Khalil Shakir, Buffalo Bills wide receiver. Currently goes out the board as the wide receiver 54. But what's crazy is that we're all extremely low on him. He's my wide receiver 66, your wide receiver 73, our consensus wide receiver 68. And in comparison, we have Keon Coleman as our consensus wide receiver 56. I mean, I've got Keon Coleman pretty far down.
You got him buried.
I have Keon Coleman buried in my rankings. And then Curtis Samuel, who is the wide receiver 58, just for comparison of where we have these guys. The reward we get with Khalil Shakir here is that he could be the number 1 wide receiver in the Buffalo Bills wide receiver room this year. There is no clear consensus on who is the top dog here. Dalton Kincaid, I'm talking specifically wide receiver, and we all know Dalton Kincaid is going to be the best pass catching option in this offense. But honestly, with there being no consensus, and honestly might as well be Khalil Shakir because he's the longest tenured Buffalo Bill on this team. Keon Coleman was drafted this year. Curtis Samuel and Marcus Valdez-Scantling, Chase Claypool, they're all free agent signings. Khalil Shakir's been around for longer than Dalton Kincaid even, right? Yep. He is the longest tenured Buffalo Bill. So, it might as well be him with Josh Allen, but I question what the reward is.
Yeah.
For drafting him at the wide receiver 54, is my reward the wide receiver 44, 34? If it's the 34, if I knew that going in, obviously we would all take the plunge if we knew that going in. But the problem for me with Khalil Shakir is he feels more like a dart throw than he does a high upside reward player this year.
Yep. I agree. So I'm significantly higher on Keon Coleman than you are. So for me, I do feel as though Keon is the number 1 draft capital. I think just his player, who he is, I think he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver. I think it's Dalton Kincaid than him. So I think really it's between Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. And I do believe, just looking at it, thinking about it over the last little bit, that I need to reevaluate between Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. But even after I do that, I'm not sure that bumps Shakir up enough where I'm like, yes, he's worth the plunge at 54. Even if I go, okay, you know what? I think that Khalil Shakir is significantly better than Curtis Samuel. He's the obvious wide receiver 2 in this offense. I don't know if that makes him necessarily worth it as the wide receiver 54, because it's Dalton Kincaid and James Cook. They're the first. Well, actually, Josh Allen's the first option on the ground through the air. Doesn't matter. Josh Allen's first option. Then you got Kincaid and James Cook, and then I personally believe then it's Keon Coleman, and then maybe you get to Khalil Shakir. So it's just like, is it truly going to be worth it? like you said, it's just, what is the upside with Shakir? I don't see a world where he's a top 25 wide receiver.
No.
I find it very hard to believe he's a top 30 wide receiver. So it's just like, we're talking about like Jameson Williams, we're talking about Xavier Worthy. Obviously, those guys are going higher. But if I was staring down Khalil Shakir and Jameson Williams, I think I'd go JMO there just
I
because
would
I'm
too.
like, I know that I got crazy upside if a world that I'm not quite envisioning does happen with Khalil Shakir. I just don't see any sort of path that you get, that kind of return.
The other thing, so I was live with Ron Stewart a week ago from this recording, and we drafted the Buffalo Bills New York Jets Week 17 stack in Underdog's Best Ball Mania contest. If you want to hop in on that, by the way, $1.5 million up for grabs. Code fellas over on Underdog. Hop in over there. But the thing that he brought up is we ended up taking Khalil Shakir in that draft because we missed out on both Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel. And he brought up a good point. How many slot guys can you put on the field at once?
That's true.
Before it becomes ineffective, right? Like you've got Dalton Kincaid who's going to play on the inside. He's going to line up inside. He'll line up in the slot from time to time. You've got Curtis Samuel who's a slot guy. You've got Khalil Shakir who's a slot guy.
Yeah.
And you can rotate. You'll have to rotate in Keon Coleman to the slot if you want him to have any success in his rookie year. You'll have to slot him in there at some point. Chase Claypool, MVS, they're both perimeter guys, but how many of those short yardage slot guys can you put on the field at one time? And that's my big worry with Khalil Shakir. So, drafting him at the wide receiver 54, I'm not thrilled with it. Like, I'm willing to throw the dart on the prayer that the reward, pays off. But for the risk of, the wide receiver 54, when I think the floor could be closer to your ranking, Cameron, of wide receiver 73, it just doesn't excite me at that price range. I would rather take guys who, have a lower floor, maybe not as high of a ceiling, but the more we talk about Khalil Shakir, I don't know how high we actually think his ceiling could potentially be. Because if anybody thinks it's top 24, I think we're talking a little bit crazy there. He's not that kind of a talent.
No, I agree. And like Curtis Samuel's a Joe Brady guy. I'm not saying that to tell you to go draft Curtis Samuel. I'm saying that because at minimum, Curtis Samuel's going to be annoying enough to keep Khalil Shakir from being, like we said, a top 30 guy. Like Curtis Samuel will make sure that there is no path for that for Khalil Shakir.
We'll keep moving, Cameron. We got two more guys to cover here. We'll move on to the running back position again. Guy who had a very strong finish to the end of last season, Zamir White, running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. He was given 20-plus touches in 4 straight games to close out the 2023 season without Josh Jacobs. He was the running back 12, the running back 16, the running back 16, the running back 19 in those 4 games. He appears to be the guy there right now.
Yeah.
Out you and I, Minnesota Vikings, all 3 of us here at the Fellas, Minnesota Vikings fans, we couldn't wait to get Alexander Mattison off the field last year. So as much as people are like, yeah, you know what, but he might compete. He started in Minnesota last year. He might compete for starting touches. I'm going to tell you right now, Alexander Mattison is not that guy. He's not. Watch a Minnesota Vikings game last year and watch Alexander Mattison just run straight into the butts of defenders at the line of scrimmage. It's not a pretty sight. That being said, though, we saw Josh Jacobs struggle last year. And we're talking about a guy who had a massive outlier season in 2022, came crashing back down to earth last year. Did not look like himself, seemed to struggle in this Raiders offense. And you know what? I will give a little bit of a golf clap to Dylan Laube right now, getting a little bit of hype out of Raiders camp. Well done, kid. He's building up a little bit of steam there. So however much you want to buy into that, but he's going off the board as the running back 26, where he is currently my running back 19. Cameron, you're running back 33, but our consensus running back 28. So you and I are pretty far apart here. Yeah. We're about actually evenly apart on Zamir White. Is the risk worth the reward for you?
So I will say I feel like I am a little low on Zamir White. I think that's something I need to reevaluate. I think he's probably going to end up inside the top 30 for me as we get closer to draft time. But I will say, compared to some of the other guys we've talked about, yeah, he could be a top 15 running back this season. He easily could. I mean, especially if we see similar volume to what we saw last year, right? I mean, I'm not expecting 20 plus touches a game, but if Gardner Minshew's starting, it's not like he's going to be throwing the ball 50 times a game either, right? I mean, they're going to have to kind of even it out. We don't trust Madison. Maybe Lauby steps up, but even if he does, it's not like we're expecting, crazy numbers from him. We're not expecting him to go, push to be the one in this offense. So I do recognize that at the running back 26 price tag, there is enough upside where, especially, best ball drafts, just because I'm doing so many of them, I have been taking Zamir White in those. If I'm in my main redraft league, I'm probably going to stay away. But I do recognize that there is upside for Zamir White there that I think he can for sure outproduce at running back 26. I'm just more on the edge of, I don't know if I truly believe that he's that guy. That's where I'm at. I just don't truly believe that he's that guy. So that's why I have him lower. I think he'll be kind of gross to watch this next season behind this Raiders O-line. I don't think it's going to be a fun rushing attack, but I think he'll kind of volume his way to a top 30 finish.
I think his reward is the running back 16 this year. He's not a guy that I think has game breaking, breakout RB1 kind of season. Potential. I think he is like, you're getting him at the running back 26. Your reward is he finishes at the running back 16 this year, which my ranking of running back 19 is like, towards the top of where I would be. He's going as the running back, I believe, 21 on Underdog Fantasy right now. I mean, he's running back 26 on Sleepers. That ADP I'm much more okay with. I'm okay with taking a shot on Zamir White there at the running back 26. But when I'm looking at the running back 21 on Underdog, I'm just not convinced the reward is potentially there. For a guy who's in a not great offense after we saw Josh Jacobs struggle last year. And I agree with you. Zamir White's a nice little player, but let's not pretend he's, Josh Jacobs' first round pick kind of player. So what it comes down to for me is, will he get the volume this year? Will he be a 20 plus touch per game kind of guy? Because that's what he's going to need to be. That's what he needed last year just to get to running back 16. And so if you think he can be, then yes, the reward is absolutely worth the risk. But if you're thinking, you know what, Alexander Madison and Dylan Lauby, they're going to come in and they're going to spell, 8, 9, 10 touches from him every single game, then no, the reward is not going to be worth the risk. But to me, I think Zamir White is still an 18 touch per game kind of guy, because I don't believe in Alexander Madison. And, as much as Dylan Lauby, great guy here, I'm pretty sure. I don't think they're going to go away from Zamir White. They have sung his praises all off season long, and I'm going to listen to that, and I'm going to ride with Zamir White there at the running back 26 and say that the reward will be worth the risk at that price tag.
For sure.
One last guy to talk about, Cameron.
Alrighty.
And this is a fascinating one.
It is.
Josh Palmer on the Chargers is super interesting to me, because I think he could be the wide receiver 1 on this team this year. Could be. The question will be, how valuable will that be? Because for his career, he has been a nice wide receiver 3. Josh Palmer has been a fine piece to have on your NFL roster. I think any team would happily have him as their wide receiver 3. But that's the risk you run, right? Is that Josh Palmer has another finish, outside of the top 40, 50 wide receivers. He's my wide receiver 52, your wide receiver 61, Cameron, consensus wide receiver 54. He is our highest ranked Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver, not named Ladd McConkey, because we have QJ at wide receiver 73 and DJ Chark at wide receiver 65. So we are in agreement that Ladd is going to be the wide receiver 1 here this year. I sung praises of Ladd in our last mock draft episode. I asked the question, and maybe, I don't know, have you listened back to that one? I'll ask you this question, because I think it's a fascinating question.
I have not, no.
So I was listening to Brett Coleman on the Fantasy Pros Fantasy Football podcast the other day. It was an old one. They were reflecting on, guys who could absolutely break out in the NFL this year after the NFL draft. And he asked the question, how many slot cornerbacks in the NFL do you think could cover Ladd McConkey for more than 2.5 seconds?
Yeah.
Because that's how long Justin Herbert's going to have to throw the football this year, right? When they really beefed up that offensive line, they get Darisaw back, they took Joe Alt, they've invested into that offensive line. So Justin Herbert's going to have all the time to throw in the world this year. Now the question is that at the benefit, or does that benefit Josh Palmer then? And his current ADP, let me pull that up quick here, is the wide receiver 63. Is that risk worth the reward for you, or are you just wasting a pick at that ADP?
I don't think you're wasting a pick because, like you said, there is a world where he's the wide receiver 1. There's a very likely world where he's at least Justin Herbert's wide receiver 2. Last season, he only played in 10 games. If he plays all 17, right? I mean, we're talking about a top 40 wide receiver. So at the very least, right, he's outperforming his ADP by 25 spots. And that's last season with Keenan why can I not say Keenan? Keenan Allen. So I do feel like he's probably worth the risk. He's one of the latest guys we're talking about right now, pick 150 over on Sleeper, right? So you're waiting a ways before you have to take them, right? Zamir White, we're talking about in the 7th round. We're talking about Josh Palmer in the 12th round now. He's a guy like 2 years ago, he had 107 targets. Do we really think he has more than 120 this year?
No.
Probably not. No. He's not going to break into the top 25, but he could be a fringe top 30 wide receiver for you. I think that's for sure within the range of outcomes. I also got to say the floor is very low for Josh Palmer.
Yeah.
Because it's a new regime they could look at and go, all right, it's your 4th season. Let's continue to give QJ a try. Let's, we just brought in Chark. Let's give him a try. McConkey's going to be our main guy who we're just going to feed. Because, I mean, that's could happen. He's only had 4 touchdowns in a season. That's his high. So, I mean, obviously that would have to come up, if you're looking for something valuable. So Josh Palmer is a guy I'm more okay with taking the risk on because he is later and I do see a path for him to get higher. It's just, he's kind of a talent one. Is he good enough, or is it kind of like MVS, right? Where we're like, oh, he has this path with the Packers and he just couldn't do it. And then we're like, oh, he's on the Chiefs and then he just couldn't do it. So that's kind of how I feel about Josh Palmer. Is he a talented enough wide receiver to kind of break into that, fringe wide receiver 30 range?
So I agree. I don't think you're wasting a pick here on Josh Palmer, but your expectation can't be that he's going to be this year's breakout, Nico Collins in the 12th round, right? Like that can't be your expectation for Josh Palmer. Your expectation for Josh Palmer can be, does he finish 25 spots ahead of ADP, like 25 wide receivers ahead of his ADP and finish as the wide receiver 38 this year? Yeah, there's totally a world where that happens because newsflash, the Los Angeles Chargers are going to have to throw the football this year. They're not going to run with Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal, and J.K. Dobbins every single game. They're going to have to throw the ball. And it's not like Ladd McConkey is going to draw 160 targets in his rookie season.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. I think that would be crazy if that happened. So some of these will have to get filtered to Josh Palmer. And Justin Herbert will have to throw the football. And he's going to have 3 seconds, at least, it feels like, to find his options and get him the football. So I don't think you're wasting a pick on Josh Palmer there. Again, I do think he's going to be one that this new regime is going to have a hard time quitting probably because he's been around. This is the disadvantage now of being the longest tenured wide receiver on a team, right? When a new regime comes in, you're actually probably going to be one of the first ones to go versus in Khalil Shakir's case, when they're bringing new people in and they're like, we'll see if you work. We're going to give you a try. That's the disadvantage that you get when the Bills isn't even a new regime, right? Sean McDermott is still there. It's just new offensive coordinator.
Who was there last? Or no, he wasn't there last. No, Joe Brady was there last year, wasn't he?
He was. He took over midway through the season.
Okay,
He took over like week 10, I believe.
He's already worked with Shakir too. So if you're right, very different situation.
Right, very different situations compared to what the Los Angeles Chargers are in. So I don't think you're wasting a pick. I do think the risk is definitely worth the reward there, because I do think he will pay off this ADP. But again, we can't set this expectation of Josh Palmer is this year's breakout wide receiver one, right? That's when I make my late round target that everybody's sleeping on this year, and I nailed Nico Collins last year. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to be Josh Palmer this year. And if it is, if I come around on Josh Palmer this offseason, Cameron, remind me that I made that we did this podcast, and that I can come back and say, all right, this is why I wasn't excited about Josh Palmer this year.
For sure. I can do that.
I appreciate it. Anything you want to add before we wrap up this risk versus reward episode?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting in your drafts to kind of take a variety of guys. I'm not just going to take a whole bunch of Jameson Williams, my entire last half of my draft. I'm going to take some guys like who is our third wide, like Christian Watson, like a Josh Palmer, who, I know Josh Palmer may not be exciting, but I at least know I'm going to get a decent, a good enough return on investment, albeit injuries. So I think just mix up kind of how you're doing it. But for some of these guys, you do got to call your shot. You got to say, okay, I think Zamir White is a good enough running back that he can finish higher than his ADP, or I don't think he's a very good running back, so I'm going to watch out, because not all these guys are going to be situationally dependent.
And all these rankings that we brought up, you can find in our 2024 draft guide, fellasdraftguide.com. That is down in the description of the audio podcast or YouTube video you are watching. $10 over there, or you can sign up for Underdog Fantasy with the code FELLAS. Enter any of their contests, literally any of them. You can make a pick'em entry. You can join their $5 puppy draft right now, like $5. That's it. You get basically you get our draft guide half off at that price, and you get a chance at winning $750,000. A chunk of that, $100,000 is top prize, but you get a chance at winning a share of that for $5. So not only will you get a free square, not only will you get a deposit match of up to $250, but we'll send you our draft guide for absolutely free. So again, $10 over at fellasdraftguide.com, or promo code fellas on Underdog Fantasy. Join any of the contests, and we'll send you our draft guide for 100% free.
Perfect.
We'll be back next week. We've been doing our tiered rankings series on YouTube now. That is entirely based on our draft guide as well. We are back next week. What do we have early next week? We're going to do some ranking debates early next week. We've been debating in our group chat quite a bit about some rankings. So
about Keon Coleman.
I have a feeling his name's going to come up. I figured you two would call me out on Keon Coleman. But these are the debates we'll have next week on one of our episodes. We'll also, golly, I forgot what our other podcast episode is next week. I've got it all scheduled out. This is the disadvantage of scheduling out like literally months and months in advance, because it comes the week, I'm like, great, I know what I'm doing. We're talking about breakout candidates next week. There we go. We are talking some breakout candidates as well. So we'll be back then with some more tiered rankings. Until then, though, stay safe, stay healthy. One of these days, we're going to get all three of us back on the podcast.
It's coming.
We're hoping it'll be Monday for our ranking debates. We'll see you all then. Deuces.